Paul Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And having listened with interest and got a flavour of the discussion thus far, I thought it was an appropriate time to stand and perhaps inform the discussion a bit better, because there's certainly, to use the immediate previous speaker's words, a lot of claptrap being shared around the place. And let me demonstrate that firstly by confirming to Mr. Mallard that in fact I was not a member of the select committee that in fact considered this bill. I was not a member of the select committee that considered the bill, and perhaps if he had have actually done a bit of work in preparing himself to speak to this bill instead of doing his usual trick of just winging things along and getting himself in all sorts of trouble, he might have understood that. And as I said in my second reading, the Parliamentary Council were profuse in their apology for, in fact, the mistake they freely admitted was theirs in the redrafting of this bill. And as a consequence of that, yes, there is a supplementary order paper, which in fact, no, you see, I did not stuff up, actually. It's a matter of being able to understand English. Forget the law that you can't understand. Understand English. Read my lips. The Parliamentary Council were profuse in their apology. Understand that? Okay? So let's put that to side. The second point that I'd like to make, and Leanne Dalzell, who led the discussion from the opposition point of view, pleaded for the number that might be affected, prisoners that might be affected by this. And in round figures, to satisfy her curiosity, I can tell her the numbers are about 8,000. And then she proceeded to go on about what's the mischief behind the bill. Well, actually, there is no mischief. This is what the overwhelming majority of the people want. And I would suggest to the opposition that if they just, for a moment, went and actually consulted with their constituents, as I have done in the Hutt Valley, they will find that all of them actually, in fact, the starting point for most members of the community is that they actually think that prisoners can't vote, and that's what they like. They actually think prisoners can't vote, and that's actually what they believe, prisoners can't vote. And the point is that when they find out that actually some can, they actually are aghast. And so the overwhelming majority of the community actually want prisoners not to be able to vote. And you see, I take my guidance. The great thing about the justice system in New Zealand is that, in fact, it is in fact decided by our peers. And our peers are not the intellectuals, not the Chardonnay socialists, that pretend to be independent advisors, not the academics that sit in government-paid-for ivory towers and pontificate to the world, not even, in fact, the Royal Commissioners, all of whom, in fact, were not one blue-collar member there. I take my lead from, in fact, the overwhelming majority of New Zealanders who actually represent the ordinary sort of bloke, the sort of people that opposition claims to represent. The sort of people that opposition claims to represent. Well, I say to them, get out and consult with them and get away from your Chardonnay socialist bars with your wine and get out and listen to the people. The next point I want to talk about is actually address some of the issues raised by David Clendon. David Clendon talked about this was going against the tide of other jurisdictions. Well, I find this fascinating. This from a party that has spent the last 2 weeks lecturing us about sovereignty, doing what we want, not being influenced by other people. And yet they sit there now and say that, in fact, that we cannot, we're going against the tide of of the opposition, all the other Mr. Chair, we're going against the tide of all the other jurisdictions and going for this bill. Yes, and, the UK has actually had to change the law. But let me read you something from one of many of Grant Robinson's mentors. This is Anthony Painter, which he showered his colleagues with. Anthony Painter talked about this issue, and by his own admission, an overwhelming majority of British people actually believe prisoners should not get the vote. There's the paper that you actually sent people to go and actually see. And in fact, Britain does not want to lose its sovereignty on this matter. It is being driven to it by the EU. And I find it fascinating that now when it's convenient, the Green Party call into play other people's sovereignty to try and influence this fair. Well, I say New Zealand wants to stand up for itself. New Zealand wants to stand up for itself and make up its own mind, and the overwhelming majority, in fact, do not want. Now, Mr. Chair, this argument is about a line in... Where is the line in the sand? Where is the line in the sand? At the moment, it's 3 years. And we heard a lot from Mr. Robinson. In fact, about the fact that it's 3 years because... they say it's 3 years because people that are actually given less than 3-year sentences, we try to rehabilitate them. Well, I would ask Mr. Robinson, firstly, perhaps he should go and read the 1986 Royal Commission report. Because the 3 years actually came... The reason we have 3 years in this bill, in the current legislation, the reason we have 3 years, if you listen carefully, Grant, you'll pick this up. The reason we have 3 years is because the Royal Commission, in considering this point with no logic given, just said, we think prisoners... from a starting point, should have the vote, but society probably thinks that at some point in time a crime is serious enough that they shouldn't be able to vote. Now let me see. People that live overseas continuously for 3 years can't vote. That's a good number. That's the basis. It is correct. And read the Royal Commission report. And in fact, if you look at it, it's about paragraph 186. It's about paragraph 186, if you really want to get down to it. So those are the facts. It's a line in the sand. It had nothing to do with actually a 3-year term of election. Nothing. The fact of the matter is that timing is incidental to this. Even now, people with 3-year sentences can miss an election, because they can go in halfway through a cycle and they miss that election. So timing is actually irrelevant to this whole argument. And it's a red herring and that the opposition have got tied up in. So the whole point is, so it's about a line in the sand. And the real issue about the line in the sand is that actually the Royal Commission, in its view, based its decision or its recommendation on the fact that in its view, people got sent to prison for misdemeanours. The simple reality of life is that they don't. People do not get sent to prison for misdemeanours. People who go to prison create serious crime. And I can tell you, I can give you any figure you want. 75% of people that go to prison for the first time have committed at least 10 crimes. They have at least 10 convictions against their name. 75% for the first time. And I mean, what about? How do you think Mrs. Vercoe thinks? What do you think, Mrs. Vercoe? No, we do go here because this is the real issue. What do you think Mrs. Vercoe thinks when her son Hawea got killed and the guy that killed him got a sentence of 2 years, 9 months? Now, do you think that's fair? I don't. He got sent to prison for a serious crime, and that's what this argument is about.
I call Jacinda Ardern.